Welcome to Before the Day Ends. So last time we focused on chapter 21 and Jesus' triumphal entry, where the people celebrate Jesus coming to Jerusalem. Now, their expectation was that he was coming to overthrow Rome, that he was the Messiah who would free the Jewish people from the oppressive rule of the Romans. Well, Jesus did come to free the people, including us, from oppression, but not from Rome, not from some political power, but to free them from the oppression of their own sin. And they misunderstood that, as we sometimes do too. We have our own expectations of Jesus, and those sometimes get in the way. So Jesus shows up in Jerusalem, and he doesn't show up to the Romans. He shows up at the temple. And when he gets there, he does something unexpected. He drives out the money changers and those who are buying and selling. Well, why? Well, the temple was kind of made in these concentric areas. In the center was the Holy of Holies. Outside of that, the temple itself. Outside of that, the courtyard of the Jews. Outside of that, the courtyard of the Gentiles. And it was that larger area, that larger portico where the Gentiles could come and pray. They couldn't go into the other inner areas, but they could stay in that outer area and pray. However, the religious politicians of the day turned that outer area, that court of the Gentiles, into a place where you could go and buy your sacrifices, exchange your money into temple money, as a one-stop shop, as a convenience. So instead of going out to the hills or to a money changer someplace in Jerusalem, they can go right there to the temple and get everything done one place and then take care of their sacrifice. It was convenient, it was simple, it was expedient, but it left no place for the Gentiles to pray. And that's what it was there for. It was to be a place of prayer. So Jesus shows up and he's upset and he kicks everybody out and gets rid of all the money changers and all that kind of stuff because this was a place for the Gentiles. Remember, Jesus was all about going to the Gentiles, as we saw in chapter 15. He was about the outsiders. He was about the outcast. And so when he shows up in the temple, he kicks out the religious authorities. He makes a place for the outsiders and the Gentiles, and he begins to heal them and take care of them and to teach, as he's been doing all along. He's doing the exact same things that he was doing in northern Galilee and Capernaum and places like that. Then he leaves town. Again, unexpected. He comes back in the morning, and we have this very, very puzzling story I want to talk about today. It occurs in Matthew 21, beginning in verse 18. It says this: In the morning, when he returned to the city, he was hungry. And seeing a fig tree by the side of the road, he went to it and found nothing at all on it but leaves. Then he said to it, May no fruit ever come from you again. And the fig tree withered at once. When the disciples saw it, they were amazed, saying, How did the fig tree wither at once? Now, it's interesting what the disciples are questioning. It's kind of like the miracle side of this. Like the fig tree withers at once, which, by the way, would be a pretty handy skill to have, right? You have weeds in your yard. We have weeds in our yard. It'd be nice, instead of getting some Roundup out or some chemicals, to just say, and they wither at once. So I kind of get why this would be this big miracle, but they're also missing the point of the tree itself. Like, what did the tree do wrong? Here comes Jesus to a fig tree. It's alive. It's got leaves. It looks healthy. It looks like a good tree. But when he gets close to it, there's no figs on it. Was it because he was hungry that, he's angry because he was hungry? Well, there's many places where Jesus was hungry. Remember when Satan tempted him in the wilderness and said, turn the stone into bread? Jesus says, no, I'm not going to do that, because there's things more important than bread, like the words of God. Jesus, we saw before, turned 5 loaves and 2 fish into a feast for a multitude. So it's not about the food. So what did this tree do that caused Jesus to curse it? In fact, this is the first time that Jesus curses anything in the Bible, and it's a tree. Well, I think it's this. When you set it next to the temple, both the temple and this fig tree looked alive. They looked like they were doing the right thing. They looked good on the outside. But when you got close to them, when you look inside, you saw that they weren't bearing any fruit. the temple wasn't bearing fruit, and this tree wasn't bearing fruit. And Jesus says, if you're a tree and you look great on the outside, but you're not bearing fruit, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And that is what is cursed. The one that looks good, but isn't bearing fruit. About 500 years before this happens, the people of Judah were doing the same thing. They were looking good on the outside, but they weren't producing anything for God. They were practicing their religion as a habit, not as an act of faith. And so their leaders would say, look, everything is great. We say peace, we say prosperity, everything is wonderful, but underneath was this rot. And God was caring about their faithfulness. Again, everything looked good on the outside, but inside of them was rot and death and just immorality and unfaithfulness. And then in Jeremiah, the prophet says this in Jeremiah 8, verse 13. When I wanted to gather them, says the Lord, there are no grapes on the vine, nor figs on the fig tree. Even the leaves are withered, and what I gave them has passed away from them. So this is a warning about having form but no function, right? They looked like a good fig tree, they looked like a good grapevine, they looked like a good temple, but they weren't producing fruit. And sometimes that can be true of us as well. They are cursed because they weren't doing what God gave them to do. God planted them, planted us, waters and takes care and grows, and then yet we don't produce anything with it. Now the disciples don't see this connection necessarily with Jeremiah and the fig tree or the temple. But Jesus goes along with it. He doesn't kind of call them out and say, you're missing the point. He goes along with them and he kind of focuses back on what they're excited about, which is the fact that the fig tree is withering immediately. And so in Matthew 21:21 it says this, Jesus answered them, truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only will you do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be lifted up and thrown into the sea, it will be done. Whatever you ask for in prayer, by faith, you'll receive. So a lot of folks take this section and they say, oh, if you ask for anything you want, if you ask with enough faith, then you'll get it. And it's almost like faith to them is a battery. If you can fill up the battery all the way to the top and have enough power, if you filled up that canister with enough faith juice, man, you can get whatever you want from God. Well, faith isn't a battery, and faith isn't some canister you can fill up with something called faith. Faith is a commitment. It's trust. It's a placing God first in your life and directing the actions of your life. So what is he really saying here? He's not saying, ask for whatever you want, you're going to get it if you have enough faith. Verse 22, he says, whatever you ask for in prayer. So look at that first part, in prayer. You're not asking just for anything, anywhere. You're asking in prayer, which means you're talking to God. You're not talking to anyone. You're talking to God. And that's going to put a context what we ask for. Are you going to ask for something to God, which you know God won't approve of or God is against? No. So you ask for it in prayer. You are talking to God, and then with faith. A faith that bears fruit, like the fig tree should have, like the temple should have. So you're asking God in faith, trusting in God, trusting in what he wants from you, trusting in what he sees as meaningful. It's being connected to the power source. You can't ask for something over here when you're not connected to the power source. In the Gospel of John, Jesus says it like this in John chapter 15, verse 5. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown to the fire, and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it'll be done for you. So we have in John a parallel to what's going on here with the fig tree, or the vine in Jeremiah, that if you don't bear fruit, you can look the part. You can look like a very healthy Christian. But if you don't bear fruit, you're going to be cut off and thrown to the fire. If you don't bear fruit, you're not connected to the vine. So what we're looking for here is for us to bear fruit. And by the way, notice that the tree in our story in Matthew doesn't have time to prepare. It can't say, well, in the spring, that's when I'll put my fruit out. Jesus shows up that day, and it should have been bearing fruit, as with the temple, as with us. So if we're not bearing fruit now, we need to start today to bear fruit for the kingdom, to be really connected to the vine, to make sure that our hope, our courage, our trust, our faith, how we make decisions, that those things come out of our life with God. I mean, it is so easy today to connect ourselves to everything else, to connect ourselves to politics, to a political party, to a friendship, to a relationship, to a job, to anything else that we get connected to. But there's only one place where we're going to find power, and that is to the vine, that is Christ. And so if we're going to bear fruit, we need to be connected to Jesus. And if we're connected to Jesus, if we're praying in faith, and we're praying obviously to God in faith, then we ask for things in line with what's best for the vine, what is best for the kingdom, what is best for those around us. And Jesus says those things will be answered. But it begins with asking ourselves the question, what are we connected to? What is it we spend our time dwelling on? Where do we place our hope? Because if our hope isn't grounded in Christ and in His victory and in His presence, then we're going to be afraid. We're going to be lacking in faith. We're going to be not bearing fruit because we're worried about everything else but what really matters. What matters most, Jesus says right here in Matthew and in John, is that we are connected to Him and that we bear fruit for His kingdom before the day ends.